Hey, how's it going, everyone? We've got a nice little relaxing stream for you today. We got Cora in here. We got Q Willy 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 Wee. We've got P Dub. Kai, how's it going? Doing well. No clue what time it is. No clue what time I went to bed, but it feels like it was late. You guys partying it up last night on a Sunday? Today is a Canadian holiday. It's our Thanksgiving Day. We have it a month before you guys in the States. So I'm having a nice little day off, even though I am working. Marcin, how's it going? Just got home from work, ready to hear some beats. Yeah, that is pretty much it. So this stream is all about just sampling. I actually want to put together some resources for like the best. I was thinking of different things I could do, like creating a cheat sheet for sampling, or coming up with like a resource for the best YouTube channels and pages for finding samples. I have a few that I like to follow. So I was thinking of maybe putting something together and just sharing it with everyone. I know a lot of you guys are sample diggers, e-diggers yourselves. So yeah, that might be a helpful resource for everyone else. Just watching a funny movie, says Cora. Which funny movie? I would like to know. But yeah, this challenge is all about sampling. I'll let you guys choose whatever sample you want. Just make a sampled beat. So no hard restrictions here other than just using a sample. And I'm interested to see what you guys have come up with. I mentioned this in the last stream. I know a lot of you guys have bought and used Note Grabber up until now. I'm already in the works with my developer to basically start thinking about ideas for version 2.0. We've talked about such features including a zoom. A lot of people wanted zoom, note preview. We're also talking about maybe adding like a grid to the back that aligns with the BPM so you can see when the notes play. Those were the major inclusions. What else was there? And we are somewhat talking about how to better approach selecting notes easier. I know a lot of people, part of the appeal is like the manual grabbing and letting you see every note as opposed to having like an algorithm in between that tries everything for you and then screws everything up. But nonetheless, people have mentioned that they do want the ability to have some way of automation. I have come up with an idea. I don't know if it's going to work though, so I have to go back and forth with my developer on that. That might be a future feature that might come down the road. But up until that, the big three that I want to add ASAP, or zoom, note preview, there's a grid line. Also, I want to allow for more than one machine to use one license. So that's another one. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts and opinions on further features that you would like to see. Cursed Friends, I've never even heard of that movie. It's really awesome, loving it, excellent. Those are some amazing improvements already. Sherb, how's it going? I noticed my name is in the wheel twice. Ooh, right. I remember that you told me to delete your double submission there. So this one is assuming the one that was submitted twice. There we go. Thank you for that heads up there, my friend. And yeah, that is about it. So once again, if you guys have any suggestions or things that you would like to see, please let me know. And other than that, let's just go ahead and start spinning, guys. The first beat of the day that we will listen to is one from Z-Lock. Congrats to the Z-Meister. So let's jump in, take a listen. And we'll be here probably an hour and a half-ish. And then we'll do the other half of the beat reviews next week. So, yeah, hopefully you guys are down to hang out for a little bit here. Is that Colin Mockery? T-Rex, how's it going? Jay, good to see you as well. I used to watch Whose Line religiously. I used to watch it like every night as well. I enjoyed Colin Mockery and Ryan Stiles. Great performers. I'm liking the faster snaps to keep the consistent rhythm instead of the hi-hats. Don't really hear that much with the hats pushed way back. Keeps it chill. P-Dub says, I like the percussion with the snaps and the vocal samples fit well. Super chill beat, says Kai. Really like the pushback vocal sample and the melody and the sparse drum fills that come in at times, but feel the snaps, claps are a bit too bright. Possibly some other percussion. Two says, sure, but great chill vibe. Yeah, I feel the same way. I really like the laid back feel to the beat. Great atmosphere in the production as well. Graham, how's it going? Cora says, I do feel something a bit more upfront dry with more musicality may help certain areas and add more variation. I feel that jumped out to me as well. So yeah, I really like the amount of atmosphere in the beat. I like that vocal sample as well. It's such a great layer to add into the beat to build more character. T-Rex says, I feel the track needs another element to be able to influence the arrangement as well for interest. Yeah, you guys are picking out exactly what jumped out to me as well. The things that jumped out to me in terms of what I would have liked to see is having a more melodic idea, something a little bit more dry and upfront, just because everything is more atmospheric. I feel as though some melodic idea that was a little bit more dry and upfront could have both helped the beat feel a little bit more full, as well as just provided a lot more material to change for the arrangement. Just because as of right now, we have this sort of back and forth where we have this nice, thick bass, and we have the drums that come in, and then the bass gets dropped out, and then it's pretty much the exact same thing over and over again. While I do like the small percussive ideas, it did feel as though a little bit more grounding would have been nicer as well. That sort of snare that's on the 2 and the 4, or 3 and the 7, feels just very washed out, and so we don't have any element that feels like it's grounding the beat or providing a nice sort of upfront dry feel. Everything feels, for the most part, washed out. So yeah, having a little bit more of a dry snare and maybe one more melodic idea, a little bit more upfront, could have provided more completeness to the beat, but also give the ability to sort of build out a more full idea in terms of the arrangement. The bass sounded great as well. I was a really big fan of the bass, as well as those percussive elements. Really unique way to fill up the beat. I think just those two things could have helped the beat feel more complete. Neo, how's it going? Yeah, I think we're seemingly, based on the comments, we're all on the same page in terms of what we would like to see out of this beat. But I really like that core idea, especially those vocals as a way to add character into your beat. Very awesome. I like that idea. All right. Next up, the beautiful wheel has selected Jaybird, who just popped into the chat. All right, Jay. Let's see what Jay has come up with. way to end it. Let's see what the chat is saying. Caffeine Beats, how's it going? Sweet Steez is here as well. Gang. Love the low end. Bass sounding really nice, says P-Dub. The bass feels out of tune with the melody. Bass is out of key, it would seem. I was talking about the kick, says Kai. Cora's cat is assaulting him currently. Rest in peace, Cora. The drums slap. Nicole, how's it going as well? Is there a tape vinyl noise that comes in and out very rarely, or is that just the speakers? I did not pick up on that, but possibly. The bass is out of key here, says T-Rex. I've also used a different 808 or synth bass. Feels like it needs more variation and sounds to keep it interesting, says Sherb. Yeah, tape play, says Jay. Great drum work and really liking the slightly subtle wide strings. Adds nice depth to the beat without potentially getting in the way of an artist. The bass sounds off key sometimes, perhaps a little note grabber to check the notes. Oh, Neo coming in with the suggestions there. Yeah, I felt as though I really love the sample selection and all the different chops that were used. It really sounded great. I enjoyed the effort that was put in by Jay. When I used note grabber, I saw the bass notes, but is there a way to highlight and copy notes into the piano roll? Yeah, so that is one of the features of Note Grabber. It just lets you draw in over those bass notes, then you can literally just export it into your piano roll. So yeah, love the sample selection. The different chops that were used sounded great. I especially love that section with that woodwind that comes in here. So I really appreciated the amount of structuring that was put into this beat. I really enjoyed the drums. I think the big thing, just like everyone else mentioned, is that the bass notes felt a little bit out of key. So it sounds like the wrong notes were used. And it was a little bit of an awkward pattern when especially when the bass note went into like a little bit of a higher octave. I think it's that note there. It's a little bit of an awkward pattern overall, but I do think that could be easily alleviated by just selecting the right notes. Beyond that, though, I did feel as though, maybe a little bit more of a traditional arrangement and controlling the energy levels of the beat a little bit. Although, this section here, for example, the energy level did change. Have this sort of back and forth of the different basses being used. So yeah, I just do think that selecting the right notes probably could have alleviated it. I kept trying to copy and paste. Oh, so yeah, one of the main features, the main benefits of Note Grabber is to just let you grab the notes. I have noticed you can only drag them left into the piano roll. Left into the piano roll? What does that mean? Let me know, because that's something I've not heard of. I noticed in FL that if you try to drag it over the sound in the channel rack, it won't copy in. Yeah, so that's one of the annoying parts about FL Studio. For whatever reason, whenever you try to drag it on top of the actual sound, it seems to be hit or miss. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't, but whenever you drag it directly into the piano roll, it works every time. So that's why in the tutorials that I came up with, I'm always shown dragging it into the piano roll. What about the bass in the chorus? Is that off key? I think just literally the samples playing a very particular set of notes, and the bass line is playing a different set of notes that don't exist in the sample. And as you probably know, if you use certain notes that just don't exist within the sample, it can sound off. So dissonance can be a little bit nice here and there. Some people call that spicy, says Neo. Yeah, I think dissonance, that like small little, like basically playing the wrong note here and there, can be fine as long as it's not, like, in my opinion, a very core part of the pattern and the sort of framework that you're trying to build. I think just having small notes appear here and there that are a little bit off key are fine. But it did feel as though some of those long extended notes were just not the right ones. That could be an interesting idea for 2.0 copy and paste. Huh. You know, that's an interesting idea. Maybe the idea of dragging is what's confusing people, but if we let people open up, so if it copied I'm going to write that down actually. Copy and paste notes. That's interesting. Oh, weird, didn't read that right, PW. I think naturally I just drag left. I need to drag right. Oh, you mean when you click the note and then you go leftwards? Yeah. I had a couple people mention that like they wish they could have that functionality, but I was not aware that people liked dragging leftwards. So that long high note is too long for the key. I would say I think in the course I talk about how to build good bass lines, and my advice is to first start off by just closely following whatever your sample or your initial layer is doing. So once again, Note Grabber can help you do that, but just come up with something that's very, very simple like you did here, but just ensure that you're using the right notes. And then if you want to use certain notes that don't exist within the sample, it might be a better idea to just have those occur during like a little bass riff at the end of your loop or something like that. But yeah, the first and foremost step is to just ensure that you're building your core frame of a bass line using the right notes that are closely following the musical idea within your sample. It doesn't seem to drag right on the laptop, but not a huge deal. With Note Grabber, is it possible to add a piano roll when you drag, or does it only replace? So I believe it only replaces. That is, once again, another thing that has more to do with the actual DAW that you're using. So if you were to sort of drag a normal MIDI file into piano roll, it would just replace whatever you have. Having said that, though, what Kai mentioned of just having the functionality be copy and paste, that could alleviate that problem. So that's a really interesting idea. For whatever reason, this never really popped in my head. The idea of having the core functionality be copy and paste rather than dragging in the MIDI file. Oh, I'll have to get to my developer about that. You guys have been providing some really great feedback with this plugin, though, so thank you for that. But yeah, that is my feedback, Jay. I think everyone else in the chat mentions that just adjusting those bass notes would have been the main thing to make sure you get right. All right. Next up, is it Paulie? It sure is. Let's see what Paul's got for us here. Weak Sauce Instrumental is the name. Sounds like not much confidence in this one. with the Weak Sauce Instrumental is the name. Jay asked a question. I've seen other people write their bass lines higher pitch for the key. Is it a good idea to do that than lower it? So that is a strategy that I used to do a lot more, just because it was hard to actually hear. But even if you just don't actually use a bass preset either, I'll literally just grab like a very basic synth, like a sine wave, or like a sawtooth, I should say, that is very easy to hear, and then play it in the higher octaves, and just to get a really core framework down for the bass line and make sure all the notes actually work and sound good. And then, like you mentioned, just copying and pasting those notes into an actual bass preset or sound, and then playing it at the right octave can be a great way just to double check and make sure, just like Cora mentioned, it's just easier to hear a high pitched sound as opposed to something with a lot of low end, not much color to it. Sherb says, already liking the chops, good bounce is P-dub, great bounce and sample selection, says Graham. The high end of the piano can become a bit too much on that repeated section though. Really dope sound, says Kai. Arrangement sometimes sounds a bit clunky in the transitions, but that's probably due to lack of time. I like it, says Neo. This was the style of chops I was hearing in my head, but brighter. Need to study up and try. Well done, Polly, says Cora. Dope switches, says Graham. Really like the bounce and movement during the chorus parts more, as there's more musicality there. As the verse part tends to get a bit overly repetitive. Nice switch up, says Sherb. Good space for an artist, says Neo. When a lot of elements strip back to the chops feel very loud and upfront, says Cora. Great beat, says T-Rex. All the sounds are complementary to each other. The texture and aesthetic is great. I think it needs more low end throughout the whole beat, says P-Dub. Yeah, I think you guys are mentioning a lot of things that jumped out to me as well. Good job with the overall structuring, and what I found impressive was the layering. So it sounds as though the organ that was added in and a few other small elements were added in by Polly, but they did feel very natural and worked with the actual sample. Yeah, that organ that you can hear right there. So yeah, those sounded great and worked very well with the sample. I wonder if those bells, because you can hear the organ, the exact same organ here, so that is apparent that it's not part of the sample. I liked the idea of just using different chops, just like Sherb pointed out. We have a little bit more of a musical idea during the chorus. And then for the verse, we have a little bit more of a straightforward approach to the chops. Just a little bit more straightforward, the first few repeating notes. And then at the tail end, we do have that sort of note switch up. So it goes from a more highly musical idea during the chorus to a less musical idea during the verse. So I think that's a smart approach to take. The thing that jumped out to me, though, I would say, is that, just like Sherb mentioned, inherently it is going to be a little bit of a repetitive feeling beat over time, just because, I mean, the core notes that are playing over and over again, it's fundamentally the same chords playing repeated back to back to back to back. And so inherently, like I mentioned, like it's just going to be a little bit harder to get this to sound a little bit less repetitive. I think just having some larger ideas come in and out. I think a great example of this is what The Alchemist does oftentimes with these kinds of beats, where he'll have the exact same sample stab playing over and over and over again, but then in the background we'll have these sort of musical phrases come in and out, where we have like a little bit more musicality with like this instrument that appears for a few seconds and then you don't hear it again for like another minute. So I think that's a great strategy that could have been used here as an example or an idea, just to help it not be as repetitive. So that was one thing that jumped out to me. Another thing is that during that switch up, it did feel a tiny bit empty. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty and the details with Polly's beat here, just because we know Polly is crushing it with his beats. So I'll get a little bit more of a deep dive. I think when you hear the actual full beat here, so you can hear there's like a layer of hissing and noise on top. helps fill up the high end, but then what you'll notice is that during the switch up, we have a missing layer of that static or hiss. And so just because of that, I feel as though this switch up just kind of felt a little bit empty. And I think the loss of that sort of sample feel and having the remaining elements be a little bit more synth-like might not be the best idea. So those are small little details that you can think about whenever you're making a switch up. What I probably would have done, if that hiss is actually part of the actual sample, I probably would have gotten an EQ or a filter and just isolated that hiss and just constantly play it throughout the entire beat, even during the switch up. So that's a small little idea that you can think about. Of course, there's definitely a large volume imbalance between the sections for POIs. At the same time, helps the energy dynamics, kind of works as an elongated bridge. Could have used a more low end, says Kai. I tamed the piano chops with an EQ on the repetitive loop, says Graham. I definitely struggled making a B section with my sample for variation. Couldn't get another melody that I liked. What do you guys do when that happens? I probably would just find a different chops, or you can do the strategies that a lot of people do of like using a really heavy manipulating effect, warping, or like halftime, even small stuff of just like changing the tempo, literally just changing the drum pattern and then playing chops less frequently. There's just like a lot of different ideas that you can approach. It doesn't always have to be, I need to build another musical idea. You can start exploring rhythm as well, or even just taking the musical idea that you already have, and again, just playing it with a different rhythm, slowed down or, stripped down, whatever it may be. So yeah, I think that's my takeaway with Polly's beat here. I think just, so what it is right up here. Had another go at remixing and mastering this one. Took out the vocals, eased up on the bass, and simplified and brought down some of the drums. So yeah, my takeaway is just the small details of getting the beat to sound less repetitive. When you have an inherently repetitive core idea, which isn't a bad thing by any means, I think you'll have to go the extra distance to figure out ways to make sure that you do have some elements that come in and out, maybe that keep the beat from sounding too repetitive. And the example I pointed out of just like The Alchemist, bringing in these musical phrases in and out in the beat can be a great way of doing that. All right. Ooh, it is Kai. Marcin gets betrayed by the wheel. Kai and the wheel are best friends now. All right, let's see what Kai's got for us here. classic Diana Ross soul sample. Let's see what the chat has to say. Ooh, Kai just stepped out, unfortunately. Unfortunate luck. I like the sample use and the complementary drum work, says sure, but usually not a fan of wider snares or feel they don't work too well. But I'm liking this, says Cora. May be a little bit buried at times though. Those cymbals crashing feel a bit out of place, says sure. Vocal samples nice. I think some high pass filtering on the sample at times during the verse would help add some variation. Great beat all overall though, says Sherb. All the elements of a great beat are there, well done. I just feel the high-end vocal chops maybe a bit too loud. That's the only time the snares feel buried. Agreed with Sherb on the crashes. I like it. I'm hearing a little bit of dissonance on the hook or whatever that transition is, says Neo. Yeah, I feel as though I liked the elements of this beat that I liked. I enjoyed the actual drum pattern that was built, as well as the bass line. I felt in terms of the actual sample usage though, I wasn't a big fan of how it was used. It felt like a little bit straightforward, as though, you know, is basically two chops for the verse used back to back, or over and over again, I should say. And it just feels, it didn't really jump out to me as something that caught my ear. That sort of string that sits on top as well was a little bit, just didn't really sit well either in the sample. Yeah, there's just like a lot of degradation of the sample. I don't know, something about the way the sample's used. It just didn't feel as though it maybe took up enough space. It is perhaps that a little bit too much EQing was done, and then like that layer of strings that feels like it's very wobbly was done to replace it. I think maybe that was the reason why it just didn't really feel that great to me. It's hard to put my finger on exactly. That is a little bit loud there. So it's fundamentally a 1-bar loop over and over again, and then the second 1-bar loop gets used. That's a half-bar loop here, sorry. I don't know. It's hard for me to hear what this beat is actually going for. And the way that the beat is sort of composed and put together, it kind of sort of leaves something to be desired. I don't know. It's just hard for me to actually put a finger on what it is from a technical standpoint. And it could just entirely be that the idea is just something that doesn't connect with me, and I'm just trying to sort of rationalize and put logic to it, but it just might be that. Neo says, I like it. I'm hearing a little bit of dissonance. Oh, sorry, I already read that. I love the B section vocal chops. Those did sound cool. So it's just hard for me to sort of put into words what I felt just didn't connect with me with this beat. I think with a lot of Kai's prior beats, when he's sort of forced to use strange like jazz samples or library samples, I've been a big fan of what comes out on the other end. But I feel like with soul samples, even for me, I struggle to get them to feel novel or interesting beyond like what a lot of producers have already done with a lot of soul samples. So that could be what I'm expressing in terms of what I'm feeling. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't really have anything from a technical perspective to sort of point out. I did, like I mentioned, I did enjoy the drum pattern and the bass line. The snare did feel as though it kind of sticks out a bit. And I think that might be because there's like a lot of EQing done to the sample, and there's a lot of high presence to that snare, so that might be the reason why there's a little bit of a gap there. But yeah, unfortunately. I just don't feel as though the idea that was built feels Kai enough. In the past, I feel like Kai builds really unique ideas with his samples and sort of pushes them to be unique, whereas I felt like with this, it kind of just feels like a soul flip that I hear that I've heard done with a lot of the techniques that I've heard done very often in the past, of just very straightforward chop triggering, and just not really composing something that feels multi-layered in a unique way that Kai usually does in the past. If maybe that's what I'm feeling. Soul samples don't feel fun for me, so I get it says T-Rex. Yeah, I don't know. They're definitely producers who, when they use soul samples, I'm like, I really enjoy what is made, but to make a beat out of a soul sample, I think part of the reason why I don't have as much fun is because very often, I'm not saying all the time, very often it's just like a huge block of music. Fundamentally, there's not many parts of a soul sample where, you know, compared to other genres at least, where you're gonna get some good isolated instruments and like some really experimental sort of ideas, musically speaking. Again, compared to something like jazz or something like library music or soundtracks, where oftentimes you'll find these moments where it's just like the really unique sounds, completely isolated, and you can build on top of them. I feel like with a lot of soul samples, it's just this huge block of music, and the only thing you can do is kind of just chop and rearrange. And so for me personally, I don't have as much fun with them, and I feel somewhat more cornered in terms of what kinds of ideas I can build with them. I know that's probably sacrilegious to say, but that's just the way it is. Mikey's up next. Let's see what Mike Master General has for us.
What is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort?
That's Mikey's spy type beat. Spy Thriller says P-Dub 007. I like the James Bond idea. Digging the drums says P-Dub. Good luck clearing the sample. Is it legit from 007? I see the idea, but I don't know how the sample works for me personally. I feel like a lot of it just bleeds together. When stripped back, it feels like it works better. Yeah, that's exactly what jumped out to me as well. I felt as though there was a section in this beat that the idea more so came together, and it was when things kind of minimized and it wasn't quite leaning fully into this sort of spy espionage feel. I think it was around here. Here. this is a cool idea here. So I think, like, as you can hear with this idea, it's a little bit more straightforward, musically speaking. And so just adding like a really bouncy bass line to this, maybe if you have the capability of just adding your own instrumental pattern, maybe a layer of bells, I think that would have worked really, really well. To me, the drums overall kind of sounded weak, and I kind of also understand why. So during this part of the beat, it feels as though the drums need more presence in the beat. But if you did do that, as soon as you get to this really over-the-top hook idea, the drums would probably take up too much room, just because this huge wave of new instrumentation comes in. Say, I think just inherently using this as the hook might have just cornered you. I think just starting off with an idea like this. This sounds great to me, and then maybe finding some way to grab some of the elements from that hook. If you can isolate using an EQ, just like that flute, and then using that as like a stab or something, I think that probably could have resulted in an overall better balance. And then that would allow you to also add more emphasis to the drums and get them to sound more present. But as it is right now, it kind of alternates between the drum sounding a little bit too weak and then this overly ambitious part during the chorus that just feels a little bit too full, and that sort of negates your ability to get your drums to sound more strong and powerful. May just be that low end sample clashing with the bass. All seems a little bit jumbled. Love the textures and perk type sounds. I agree with choruses, sure, but the idea could be more developed, says Marson. Interesting sample choice, definitely a classic beat. Prodigy would have balled on this. Yeah, actually, when I was listening to this little hook here, it really reminded me of like a Mobb Deep kind of feel. There's like a beat that this really reminds me of. Yeah, it was like an early Mobb Deep beat. I can't think of what it was. Or it was like a Big Pun beat, and then Prodigy was rapping over it. Let me look it up. Hold on. Was this it?
In the mall, get it on. My outfit stuck on some wild out shit. All about it. We move gambit. Do the best attempt to sound like P or the HAVOC.
I don't know. Anyways, I love this beat, says Nicole. I've already heard the sample somewhere. I can't remember where though. Neo was mentioning that it is a 007 sample, or maybe this is just like a generic spy thriller from like a library soundtrack. Either way, there's definitely ideas in this beat that I like. I think just developing them a little bit more and creating more of an emphasis on those ideas, and then sort of walking away from that on the nose spy-esque hook that just takes up a little bit too much room and then sort of gets in the way of you being able to develop the full idea in a balanced way. Next up, we've got the Chorameister. Ooh, it is Cora. I feel like we haven't gotten the chance to listen to Cora's beats on the stream in a while, so let's see what Cora's been up to, developing his sampling skills. Cora's beat there. You have this little baby horsing around with knives. Keep your baby away from knives, people. I say this every time. People don't listen. Knives plus babies, not a good combination. The baby's not on the way. Sick beat. I love the 808, says PDeb. Perfect beat for Halloween. Great balance. Is that bass from the Substance plugin? I think it has good bones, says sure, but I can see stripping back some and taking out some of the patterns that could help you add variation and create some interesting B sections. I think me and Sherb are hearing similar things. It's a Cody 808. Like the reverse hat and open hi-hat. Cool, says Neo. Yeah, I really enjoyed the drum work on this beat. As always, I think Cora's trap drum master. Really phenomenal work there. It has a great amount of balance to it. I love the sample usage as well. Fantastic and on point to create that really dark trap feeling. As Sherb pointed out, I do think that the reason why you might have struggled is because of that sort of additional layer of, it's like a synth noise thing on top that comes in right there. It's a pretty upfront and apparent sound, and it has a lot of sustain to it. And I think that might have been why it was hard to add more. I think just having the beat play without it would work perfectly well for an actual verse section. And then for a hook, getting rid of that idea, or maybe just reducing its presence, and then just bring in more, smaller, pluckier sounds. Perhaps could have been a way to create variation, or just like I mentioned before, of just playing around with the rhythm of the actual sample, or just possibly finding different chops. I do think that huge sound that you added on top kind of cornered you. I just do feel as though overall the beat would probably sound a little bit more clean without it. It did not quite feel like a good addition. Definitely agree, need to go back and figure out the B section of the sample in terms of what John says. Yeah, I think just having that sound maybe played during the hook, and that would just open up a lot more possibilities throughout the verse as well. Great sample work though. Yeah, it sounds like there were chops being made for sure. I think what was put together for that main loop sounds really on point. Everything sounds fluent and everything sounds well put together. I just really do think that one layer is possibly what's causing all of the mayhem in the beat and getting in the way. Yeah, good job though, Cora. In terms of Cora's not really used to sampling, but I feel as though the sampling capabilities done with this beat were on point. Let us keep going. Let us keep spinning. Marcin does get selected. Sherb gets passed over yet again. Unfortunate. Here we go. boom bap type beat by Marcin there. John's cursing the wheel, digging the bass, nice bounce overall. That was not the tempo groove I expected from the intro, like the energy. Hat maybe a bit too loud and bright. Liking the simplicity yet efficiency of the instruments, says Graham. Cool up-tempo beat, says P-Dab. Really like the melody that comes in, really brings it all together, and the dropping of the sounds gives a nice variation. Really cool pocket with the offbeat flute that comes in for a sec. Yeah, with this beat, I appreciate the amount of work that was done with the arrangement, and the bass line sounded cool. I feel with so Neo says, the sample to me sounds like it could be a little bit better for a slower tempo. The intro threw me off. So yeah, with the way the sample's used, I feel as though, like, I'm trying to think, is this a strong enough POI? Especially because, you know, if we compare what Cora did with his sample, which was pretty much a raw piano, much like this, I feel like the difference here is that with what Marcin did, he really peeled back a lot of the frequencies and really constricted the amount of space that the piano ends up taking up. And it almost feels as though it loses a lot of character because of it. It just doesn't quite feel as though this is like, oh, I've never heard a piano like this in a beat before. It kind of just feels like it's very stripped down, almost to a fault where it loses a lot of its character. And because of that, you know, we have this really stripped down sample, and we have this really full sounding drum pattern, and there's almost like a detachment from it. I think just having a lot more presence be reinstated into that piano loop, bringing a lot more of the character back and a lot more of the fullness. That way, hopefully the drums start to feel a little bit more integrated, just because as of right now, that piano loop does sound like very small on the beat, and the drums do feel very large. And so there's this sort of detachment between them. Yeah, I think that was my main takeaway. And yeah, just the pattern itself with the piano. I do like the idea of adding in those additional layers and sounds, because it did add a little bit more. But the actual loop itself is, for the most part, I think it's like a half bar loop. So yeah, pairing like a half bar loop with a very thin sounding sample, I think that was probably the sort of reason why the beat just didn't necessarily feel like it jumped out to me, if that makes sense. I would have dirtied up those drums a bit in terms of textures and grit. So yeah, in terms of what that would have done from like a technical perspective of just adding more grit, you'd essentially lower a lot of the high frequencies, boost a little bit more of the lower ones, and then that would ideally put the drum range, the frequency range of the drums closer to what the sample is doing. And so that, again, kind of goes to the idea of what I mentioned of getting them to not feel so separated from each other. So that would be one step towards that, but I do feel as though accentuating the sample itself would probably be the bigger step forward in solving that problem. So yeah, that was my take with the beat. Again, I really do appreciate the amount of work done with the arrangement and adding your own sounds and stuff. I think just don't get so aggressive with, you know, making sure every single sound has its own frequency pocket. I do have that sort of framework of making sure sounds exist in each pocket, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to carve one sound to sit in one exact pocket. You do want some bleeding, you do want some overlap in terms of frequencies and sounds. That is what helps the instrumentation actually feel flush and fluid, as opposed to like stiff and sort of cold and having that detached feeling. So don't feel it's necessary to get your samples to sit in one very distinct pocket of frequencies and that's it. Having your samples, you know, even take up multiple frequencies, which is often what happens with a lot of piano samples. They're really great in filling up low, mid, and mid frequencies. So that might be another thing that you can think about going forward. if that makes sense, hopefully. Next up, Thion Green. Let's see what Thion's got for us here. Interesting idea there. Let's see what the folks in chat are saying. Really like the arrangement and drum work, super cool. Gru says Cora. Sherb says not sure what's going on here. Just sounds like a lot of noise to me. It all feels like it's competing with each other as different beats, says Sherb. Sweet Steve says, since this is a sampling stream, can we get some big sampling tips? You've already mentioned soul and jazz samples feel a little bit more limiting. I've mainly mentioned that in terms of soul samples. I was thinking of maybe putting together like a quick cheat sheet or advice tips for sampling. Let me get back to you guys on that. I think I'm going to put together something specifically for that. I just had that idea earlier today of just quick hitters that you can think about. Sherb says, I feel maybe had it been kept to a few core ideas, it would have been more of a cohesive product. I agree. Once all the effects came in, the structure kind of went out the window. I think keep the effects on the POI and take a lot of the top line ear candy. The direct inspiration for this was Lord Knows by Drake, produced by Just Blaze. That type of drum track was the main practice in this. One sample loop and one small chop the horn piece that you heard playing. So yeah, my take on this, I really like the sample. I kind of got what you're going for with this beat. Really unorthodox drum idea, which I actually ended up liking. The things that jumped out to me, like some of the guys mentioned, of just those additional layers that come in, maybe not needed. I think some of the things that jump out to me is I like the bass line. The actual pattern itself is cool. The texture seems a little bit strange in that you have this really organic, almost jazzy sample, but then you have this synthy sub bass. I think choosing a different texture for that might have been a good idea. Getting rid of a lot of those small little things like the constant crashes maybe could have helped clean things up. Yeah, like the little horns that come in and out. I don't know if those are added by you or in the sample itself, but I do feel there is a good idea in here, just carving away some of those extras. Another thing that might help is to just put a little bit of glue compression on the master, just to help things sound a little bit more full. Maybe then you wouldn't feel as sort of compelled to add more and more, just because in terms of the space that are taken up, I feel like the sample is doing quite a lot. We have that vocal as well as that really fast moving piano. So I feel as though a lot of what you need already exists in this beat. And so maybe the reason why you started adding more and more is because it didn't feel quite loud enough. But I think just adding a little bit of boosting and doing a little bit of leveling could have helped the beat feel more full, just because I do feel as though taking away some of those added drum sounds, but just boosting how loud the drums are kind of help make the beat feel a little bit more full as well, because that snare does feel a little bit weak. I think the snare choice is spot on. It sounds really, really good in terms of the choice. I think just how emphasized it is in the beat. I could have just used a little bit more prominence put on it, and I think just you'd get a much more overall balanced beat with less layers and just more of a focused idea, as opposed to what people are mentioning with this sort of mishmash feeling. Sampling tips would be great. All right, I'll keep that in mind. I'm trying to think of like just fundamental sort of principles of sampling, and it's just difficult in that, like you guys know, there's like 1,000 different ways of putting together a sample, and I've been thinking about what are like some very common, easy to use ideas that you can think about. I'm gonna have to put my brain to work for that. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense, Thion. Good idea in there. I think just stripping away a lot of the extra stuff that you added and just letting that idea actually come through would have been nicer to hear. Let's do around 2 to 3 more beats here. Let's see what Grant has for us. I feel like we haven't heard a Grant in a while. Sunday afternoon. I think I'm seeing the chat already mention things that I am picking out myself. I really like the sample, or when the vocal sample comes in, fills it out, says Sherb. A lot of mid highs and highs, all the melodic elements are in the same space, I feel. Not much to differentiate them. I do love the sound selection. Sherb says need some level adjustment as all the sounds seem to be at the same level. Need some reverb, says PDub. Maybe even bring in the Rhodes down an octave with some gain staging would help everything have its own space, play with the width and depth. Yeah, I definitely am spot on with you guys in terms of where the sounds sit. It feels as though, we have this core idea here that sits in like the mid-ish, which isn't a bad thing. Then we have these sparkling bells that come in high. And then from here, it feels as though every single additional sound or pattern just continues to fill that same space. And the entire time we have a lack of low mids. I do feel as though when those vocals do come in, it does feel a little bit more full and complete, just because it seems as though those vocals do have at least some little bit of presence in that low mid. There's a little bit of thickness to them. So that's when the space that I'm talking about, that low mid, does have a tiny bit of presence. But just like Cora mentioned, I do think having a very sort of deliberate sound sit in there, even if it is just taking the Rhodes that you already have and pitching them down, or maybe doing the exact same layer that you have, adding halftime to it, which pitches it down an octave, and then just controlling the mix to see how much of that higher version and the lower version you want. I think that was the main thing. I do absolutely love the core idea in this beat. It feels like that sort of laid back West Coast-ish feel. Patterns sound great. I just do believe that adding more and more sounds into the space that is already filled, when you have a space that is like completely bare, was the major thing that needs to be adjusted and fixed. I think once Grant does that and does a little bit more of like a balancing of that space with the remaining patterns and sounds, this beat would be like spot on. So I think that was just the one idea undermining it. Very cool perks and ear candy sounds. Yeah, I definitely agree. Like all the textures in here, spot on. Really love the sound choice and how the beat idea was built. I think just that one fundamental issue was probably the major thing undermining the beat. So yeah, great job, Grant. How many beats have we reviewed today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have total of 21. So we'll do 1 or 2 more, and then next week we'll do the remaining 10 to 11. And we'll get together and hang out next week, guys. Next up, we've got Pim. Pim is... Where's Pim? Oh, right up here. Got a Google Drive beat. Bear with me, guys. Feel free to grab a snack, go to the washroom while this thing loads up. Oh, that was pretty quick. does feel as though the underlying issue here does sort of cause this beat to be a little bit hard to critique. I think you guys in chat are picking up on it. Awesome color to the snare. Would be interested to see how it plays with the vocal. Like the sample use in the drums, though they are too bright and kind of bury the sample. So yeah, that's exactly what I'm picking up on. This beat kind of feels like all drums to me. Some further mixing could make it feel or make it sound more cohesive. I absolutely love the drums. Really cool amount of texture on them. Good processing if these were sort of built by you. Nonetheless, it does feel as though this beat is pretty much all drums and like no sample or no music or nothing else outside the sample. Cora says, if this isn't a drum loop, I'd drop them a bit and let the sample shine through. So yeah, I would do the exact same thing. I'd probably decrease the emphasis put on the drums because as of right now, this is almost all that I can hear. You can use things like transient processors, really take the tail end of all these textures and kind of tame the actual length of them. Doing some EQing just to bring down some of the highs, and then just emphasizing, bring up the volume of the sample. That would equate into a better balance. Beyond that, I'm not 100% sure if the beat would fully come together, but it just feels like as of right now, it is very hard to hear anything outside the drums, and I'm sort of unable to bring any critique to it because of that. So yeah, de-emphasize the drums. You can use transient processors and stuff and EQs to do that. And just like Cora mentioned, be careful when using these highly sort of textured snares. While they might sound great on their own, doing that quick test of adding a vocal on top just to make sure there is still space is something that might be a necessary step to make sure it's just not overly wacky and full. And the last beat of the day is Marco's. Again, we will come together next week for the remaining beats. But for now, let's end this off to Marco's beat here. A drill beat.
It's getting dark.
That was Marco's beat there. 1.1 thousand views. Marco's doing a good workout here. Getting a lot of views on his beats. Really makes me happy to see. I know Marco mentioned that YouTube can be up and down, but hopefully this is a sign that we're on and up. People dropping comments, loving it. Love to see that. Awesome. Let's see what the chat is saying. I feel like the kick and the bass don't hit through like they normally do for drill and Marco's other beats. Love the dark beat. It sounds killer to me. Sometimes that violin is a little bit sharp, maybe EQing a little. Sounds like a good drill beat though. Also missing some low mids, but Marco and I talked about it yesterday with 808 mellow style for Pop Smoke. Since he has such a deep voice, it fills up those spaces really well. That's a really interesting point. So yeah, I really liked the sample, the way that it was used. I loved these sort of orchestral beats are one of my favorites. I've talked to Marco about this as well, and he's very like deep into the different styles of drill in general. And so the first thing that jumped out to me is that like, you know, it doesn't feel as though we have that typical snare or rim or clap, but maybe that's like a genre thing. It's just something that maybe I'm just a geezer and don't know. And just like you mentioned, Cora, it did feel as though like the thought occurred to me of like, oh, maybe emphasizing the low mid of the sample, that one string that sits in the very low mid that plays very slowly. But like you mentioned, I do know that there are some artists that really prefer to have most of the samples sit up there. But there is a little bit of coloring with the 808 that comes in, and so that space does get filled a tiny bit with the 808 as well as the actual sample there. It's just in terms of how much, I guess that would be fully on what the artist wants and what the producer wants as well. But it is good to hear that there is some texture or sound sitting in that space. It's just a matter of how much to the person's liking. And yeah, I think great job of adding your own sounds into the beat as well. We have those really nice light keys that come in every once in a while. Yeah, you can hear it on top. They are very reverbed and they sit very far back in terms of the depth, but they add a nice amount of character to the beat and they sound flawless. So yeah, Marco's doing a lot of good work here. And you know, the fact that this has 1,000+ views on it, I feel like he's doing something right, and I don't want to steer him completely wrong by giving him advice. That just doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's really awesome to see that Marco's doing well here on his YouTube channel. And I know a lot of people in the chat want to sort of get into this as well, but it's just like you can see here, it's a game of just posting up beats. Some hit, others it might take a little bit longer, but nonetheless, you gotta post, man. And yeah, that is it for this stream, guys. Thank you once again for popping by. We will continue on next week, and I will review the remaining beats then, and I will post up the new sample challenge later this week. But until next week, guys, I will hang out and see you then. Feel free to hit me up if you have any thoughts or comments, again, on Note Grabber as well. Me and my developer are going in on version 2, so if there's things that you'd like to see, please let me